Eric Weiss, a name that might not ring a bell, but his stage name certainly does. Houdini, or to use his full stage name, Harry Houdini. One of the greatest magicians in history is about to put his skills to the test, escaping from an incredibly dangerous situation in front of a massive crowd. With his body already wrapped in chains, Houdini leaps from a bridge into the freezing water below. But here's the thing, Houdini had already hidden a key in the sole of his foot, and within seconds the chains come undone. Unfortunately, he can't find the hole he came through, and the crowd above grows more anxious by the second, wondering how this trick is going to end. The scene then flashes back 17 years earlier to Ohio in 1896. That night, Houdini was performing inside a brothel, escaping from a small trunk with his hands cuffed. When he finished, a police officer scoffed and told him those were fake cuffs, daring him to try escaping a real pair. Houdini just smiled. He turned around, slipped off a hook hidden in his belt buckle, and used it to pick the lock. But the truly remarkable thing about Houdini was that he didn't care whose handcuffs they were or how complicated the lock might be. He had trained for years to feel and read the inner workings of a lock using nothing but that tiny piece of metal. From that night on, the name Houdini spread far and wide, and he became known as the escape artist. His method was always the same, hiding the key in small corners the audience could never see. He was always assisted by his wife, Bess, and he dreamed of performing in front of a million pairs of eyes. This was Harry Houdini's story. Welcome to Houdini. Ever since he was a child, Eric had been obsessed with street illusions, things like a body being cut apart and then put back together. Eventually, he learned a trick where he would swallow a nail and bring up an egg, and he earned a fair amount of tips from his little performances. He gave all of that money to his mother, Cecilia, who always supported his magic, just like his younger brother Dash. His father, however, felt differently. As a Jewish religious teacher, the rabbi disapproved of the way Eric was making his living. Then one night, Eric read a book about a famous magician from long ago named Robert Houdin. From that moment on, he idolized the man, and he turned his own stage name into Harry Houdini. To chase his dreams, Houdini left his family behind and set out to deepen his knowledge of escape. A few years later, after his father passed away, he traveled the carnival circuit performing magic, helped by his younger brother Dash. It was there that Houdini met Bess, a theater singer. The two of them began a relationship, and before long, Houdini proposed. Bess, who had fallen for him just as hard, happily accepted. But her parents, who were Christian, threw her out the moment they found out, furious that she would dare marry a Jewish man. To them, it was a disgrace to the family. And so the journey of this young couple began. Bess learned the tricks of the trade, and together they traveled the country making a living with all kinds of illusions, including swapping places in the blink of an eye. Along the way, Houdini kept sharpening his craft until he could even pick locks using his feet. Meanwhile, his brother Dash had started performing solo shows of his own, even paying for newspaper ads to promote them. Since Houdini didn't have the money to advertise in the papers, he came up with a clever scheme. He deliberately provoked the police into arresting him, then escaped from the cuffs in the cell with ease. His feats ended up printed in newspapers across the country, and people started calling him the Great Houdini. One day, Houdini met a man named Jim who absolutely idolized him. As luck would have it, Jim was skilled in magic too, and he even built his own incredibly effective gadgets, things like compact lockpicks and tiny, nearly invisible saws. Next, Houdini took on something even harder. His body was wrapped in layers of chains, locked inside a jail cell, and his mouth was taped shut. Yet once again, he slipped free with ease, all thanks to a small piece of metal hidden inside a fake finger. Jim, a genius when it came to tinkering with magic equipment, eventually helped Houdini pull off something far bigger. An escape from a box filled with water, an act that would go on to become one of the most legendary performances in Houdini's entire career. They ran a test. But because of a technical mistake, Houdini nearly died. And strangely enough, that danger was exactly what he was after. After plenty of careful practice, his first underwater escape was ready. Once he was lowered inside, the box was locked and covered. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3, and the whole crowd began to panic. Then suddenly he burst out alive, and everyone was left in awe. Because of how convincing his illusions were, America, which at the time was allied with Britain, asked Houdini to become a spy and keep an eye on the growing threat from Germany. His skills made him a perfect fit for espionage. That night, Houdini met with a British MI5 agent named William Melville. arranged at the request of his colleague, the American intelligence director John Wilkie. Since Houdini was a Hungarian citizen, William gave him a new passport with his birthplace and date changed to Wisconsin, America. And that meant a great deal for Houdini's career over there. To make a long story short, in 1905, Houdini staged a private performance in Berlin, Germany, witnessed by the highest authority in the land at the time, Kaiser Wilhelm II. Since the Kaiser seemed unimpressed by the show, Houdini decided to challenge himself with something far more dangerous, catching a bullet fired by the Kaiser's finest soldier. His team prepared the weapon and the target, and the soldier was asked to test his aim by firing straight into the center.
Lieutenant. Wonderful shooting, Lieutenant.
After that, the gun was reloaded by pouring in powder, adding a scrap of paper, then pushing the bullet in tight. Finally, the bullet catch began. The lieutenant hesitated to pull the trigger, but Houdini kept shouting for him to fire.
Pull the trigger!
And sure enough, Houdini caught the bullet in his teeth. The trick, it turned out, was simple. When the bullet was pushed in with a rod, a magnet on the tip of that rod carried the bullet right back out, where Jim quietly collected it. As a way of thanking his mother, Cecilia, for all her support and her prayers over the years, Houdini gave her a luxurious gown and brought her to a party, treating her like a queen for the night. Later that evening at the hotel, Houdini told Bess they would have to move to Russia soon at the government's request. But the real reason behind it stayed a secret, even from his own wife. Bess asked what business he could possibly have with the government, but Houdini still couldn't bring himself to tell her. Once they arrived, Houdini again earned the chance to perform privately, this time before the imperial family of Tsar Nicholas. He asked each member of the family to write down a wish, promising that one of those wishes, chosen at random, would come true. The paper that was drawn carried a wish to ring the Kremlin bell, something thought to be impossible, since that bell hadn't made a sound in over 100 years. But with complete confidence, Houdini opened a window, turned a cloth in his hand into a rope, and pretended to grip the bell's pull. Then he asked one of the Tsar's daughters to give it a tug, and as if by magic, the Kremlin bell truly rang out.
Pull the rope.
Of course, it was all a trick. The paper with the wish to ring the Kremlin bell hadn't come from any member of the imperial family at all. It had been planted by Houdini himself. As for the bell, Jim was watching from a distance in an empty room through his scope. The moment the window opened, he readied his silenced long-range rifle and fired at the bell exactly as the rope was pulled. After that, William assigned Houdini a new task, to steal a copy of Germany's war plans kept inside a safe at their embassy office. The mission finally went ahead, beginning with a magic performance staged near the embassy as a distraction. This time, Houdini would enter a small cabinet and survive inside it for 10 full minutes. That was Houdini's window to slip away. He climbed to the roof and entered through the window of the records room, and luckily for him, the safe wasn't locked. But not long after, the German ambassador and his mistress walked into the room. Houdini quickly hid inside the safe, and unfortunately, the ambassador noticed it was open and locked it shut. An hour went by, and the audience back at the show grew restless, demanding the cabinet be forced open out of fear for Houdini's safety. Meanwhile, the only thing Houdini could do was recall the safe's combination, gear by gear, mechanism by mechanism. And at last, the safe clicked open. Houdini raced back to the stage, handed the war plans to William, and stepped out from behind the audience at the exact moment the cabinet was open. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Houdini gave his wife Bess a romantic letter along with a lavish diamond necklace.
Happy anniversary.
But once the show was over, Bess threw the roses and the necklace to the ground, convinced her husband only did these things to please the crowd. In truth, Houdini's surprise had been completely sincere. After that, they were invited to a party hosted by Lady Butler, a celebrated painter of the era. Bess deliberately tried to make Houdini jealous as he chatted happily with a group of wealthy women, kissing another man right in front of him. And of course, it broke the famous magician's heart. Once they made up, the next day Houdini was amazed to see an airplane in the sky. For some context, that year marked the launch of the very first commercial flights. Houdini, Bess, and Jim flew off to Australia, then returned to America in 1914 to continue the show. Sadly, though, people had begun to grow tired of Houdini's tricks. His audiences kept shrinking. On top of that, around this time, the public started turning to films, which they found far more entertaining than the same old magic acts. Charlie Chaplin was rising fast and becoming a household name. He was Houdini's new rival. Threatened with being booked into smaller and smaller theaters, Houdini racked his brain for a way to bring his name back to the top. Finally, he landed on a brilliant idea to take his act out of the theater entirely by dropping himself into a hole in the ice, exactly as we saw at the start.
Make a living.
By now trapped and resigned to his death, he suddenly saw the figure of his mother, who guided him out of there. But that wasn't enough. Houdini stunned the public yet again with a stunt in the middle of the city. Wearing a straitjacket from a mental asylum, he was hung upside down from the top of a building, mocking Charlie Chaplin for being nothing but a clown. And in the end, he wriggled free, even though it cost him a dislocated shoulder.
I escaped. I escaped death.
Since his performances were growing more and more dangerous, Bess was furious because all this time her husband had been selfish, never once stopping to think about her feelings or her life. After a long argument, Houdini promised to give up his escape acts for good. For his next performance, true to his promise to his wife, Houdini set out to show how a 10,000-pound elephant could vanish using nothing but the power of the mind. Moments later, his crew brought out a massive curtain. They covered Houdini as he sat atop the elephant, then pulled it back, covered it again, opened it, closed it, and the elephant was gone. Because Houdini had to travel to London, he had to leave his mother behind and asked his brother Dash to care for her. Once he reached the London stage, Houdini performed before the most famous writer of the day, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. That night, Houdini would walk straight through a brick wall built just an hour earlier by London's finest workers. Naturally, it was all a deception. The wall was real, but the floor had been modified by Jim so that it could be loosened. Arthur and his wife were so amazed that they came backstage afterward to congratulate him. Then, not long after, Houdini received a letter from his brother Dash, which turned out to carry the devastating news that their mother had died the night before. You can only imagine how shaken Houdini was reading those words. He fainted on the spot. The tour was canceled immediately, and Houdini returned to America to bury his mother. In short, after the First World War ended, in 1922 to be exact, Harry's fame had grown so much that he became a film actor, rivaling Chaplin himself. Still haunted by his grief and longing for his late mother, Houdini began visiting mediums, people who claimed they could bridge the living with the spirits of the dead. But after visiting several different mediums, all Houdini ever found was fraud, because everything they did was nothing more than a trick. Outraged by these frauds who profited off grieving families, Houdini wrote a book exposing the lies of mediums. It made him an enemy to mediums all across the country, many of whom began losing their livelihoods. He even offered $10,000 to any medium whose tricks he couldn't figure out. At 51 years old, Houdini's fame seemed like it would never die. His shows, his films, even his books were flying off the shelves. For his next performance, Houdini would escape right in front of a cannon set to fire. The slightest miscalculation and his body would be torn apart. And as always, Houdini did it again. After that, Houdini and Bess met up once more with Sir Arthur and his wife, Lady Doyle, who, as it turned out, were firm believers in spiritualism. Lady Doyle even claimed she could help Houdini reach his mother's spirit. Obviously, Houdini didn't believe in any of that, given that mediums were his sworn enemies. But once the ritual began, the candle suddenly snuffed itself out, and Lady Doyle appeared to be possessed by Houdini's mother, writing message after message to her son. Houdini, however, saw it as nothing but a performance of fake possession, since so much of what was said felt strangely off, and he accused Lady Doyle of being a fraud as well. Hearing his wife insulted, the great writer Arthur struck Houdini in the stomach. Unwilling to let that treatment slide, Houdini went on the radio to expose the couple as frauds. He even declared that everyone should stay away from Sir Arthur and his wife, calling them a danger to humanity. Houdini then doubled the reward to $25,000 for any medium, witch, fortune teller, or anyone at all who could truly convince him. After that, Houdini sought out a woman named Marjorie, said to be the most famous medium in the entire world. His goal was clear, to test her abilities, and that night she would summon the spirit of her brother Walter. A bell, a whistle, and a tambourine were placed inside a box. The lights went out, and the ritual began with Marjorie's husband seated beside her. Marjorie wasn't possessed, but she claimed she could speak with her brother. The bell and the other objects began to ring, and even a decoration behind them fell to the floor. But Houdini couldn't be fooled that easily. He exposed Marjorie's trick, revealing that she had prepared objects outside the box and sounded them once the lights went dark, including a whistle held in her husband's mouth. As for the voice of her brother Walter, it turned out Marjorie was a skilled ventriloquist, someone who can produce all sorts of sounds without moving their lips at all. Later that night, while relaxing in his hotel room, Marjorie suddenly showed up and tried to seduce Houdini into keeping quiet about her fraud. But his love for Bess was far greater, and Marjorie was promptly thrown out. For the first time in his life, for reasons he couldn't explain, Houdini felt afraid and had a terrible feeling about what was coming. For his next show, Houdini would revisit an old act, the escape from the water box. But this time, the crew lost focus, and Houdini twisted his ankle, though thankfully the performance still went off smoothly. Because his ankle was broken, the doctor advised him to wear a cast and take 6 weeks off work. But true to his reckless nature, Houdini refused the doctor's advice, since he had never once missed a performance. Hearing that, Bess was understandably furious that her husband was pushing himself so hard. Then before long, a college student named Gordon showed up. He turned out to be a devoted fan of Lady Doyle, and he began punching Houdini in the stomach over and over, unable to forgive what he had done to her. Even though Houdini had powerful abdominal muscles, all those years of challenging people to hit him as hard as they could had taken their toll, with the damage quietly piling up. Now, struck repeatedly by Gordon, the aging Houdini finally felt the pain in full. But he chose to go on with the show rather than see a doctor, just to keep the incident a secret. That night in the city of Detroit, as he was about to begin his performance, Houdini was smiling and greeting the crowd when he suddenly collapsed from the unbearable pain in his stomach. The show was canceled at once and he was rushed to the hospital. Reporters scrambled to get inside to find out what had happened to him. The doctor then told Bess and Jim that Houdini was suffering from peritonitis, an infection of the abdominal lining, which becomes truly dangerous once it begins to spread. All the doctor could do was apologize, because there wasn't much hope of saving him. In his weakened state, Houdini asked his wife Bess to sing for him, just like the first time they met. Then Houdini told her how much she truly meant to his life, and hearing that, all Bess could do was cry. In his final moments, Houdini saw the figure of his late mother, and he said that in the end, no one can ever escape death. Houdini's funeral was attended by countless people, a reflection of the enormous influence he held throughout his life. Jim, who had stayed loyal to him all those years, was left adrift, feeling he no longer had any purpose. As for Bess, now a widow, she tried to reach her husband's spirit with the help of a minister from the First Spiritualist Church in New York. But nothing ever came of it. The great Houdini, the master escape artist, died at the age of 52. So the moral of the story is, if your career plan involves handcuffs, bullets, cannons, frozen rivers, and getting punched for fun, maybe try accounting instead.